So last video, we were talking about trends for adults who are cohabiting, so living together, but not necessarily married. And then we're going to pick up back on married adults. And then we're going to talk about divorce, and then we're going to talk about same-sex couples. So when it comes to marital trends, we know that in recent years, there's been a shift where marital rates have declined in the United States. And I've got a statistic here in 2012, 48.6 of Americans were married, which is down 70%. That was the case in 1960. We know that more adults are remaining single for longer today, and a lot of that has to do with doing things like, getting an education, sort of finding your career, and a lot of times they're individuals who want to do that first before settling down. The U.S. average age for first marriage is higher now than any point in history. So those couples who are getting married are older, and we find that it tends to be a trend that men are just slightly older than women when it comes to continuing this trend. It's always been men being slightly older. And we see that the increase in cohabitation and a slight decline in the marriage of divorced individuals who remarry, they're going to also contribute to the decline in marriage rates. So those who are living together, not being married, as well as the slight decline in percentage of divorced individuals who remarry, that's going to contribute to that decline in marriage rates as well. And despite the decline in marriage rates, the U.S. is still a marrying society. Okay, about 70% of people have married at least once in their life. So that's a pretty, that's a pretty large percentage. Marriages in adolescence are more likely to end in divorce than marriages in adulthood. So the younger you are, the harder it is to maintain that marriage, just because, as you can imagine, there are issues with being mature and being able to explore other partners. But overall, researchers have not been able to pin down a specific age or an age span of several years in adulthood for getting married that is going to actually result in a successful marriage. So it's clear that it's like, okay, once you go into emerging adulthood, at some point, that's better than being married as an adolescent. It's more successful, but exactly what age that is really, really difficult to pin down. International comparisons revealed that individuals in Scandinavian countries, they marry later than Americans. So they're one of the countries that actually do marry later than Americans, one of the very few. Whereas their counterparts in many African, Asian, Latin American, and Eastern European countries marry much earlier. So there's definitely differences in culture and countries where we see age of marrying. So when it comes to the benefits of a good marriage, right? Of course, we know that those who are happily married tend to live longer. They tend to be healthier compared to those who are divorced or those who are unhappily married. As you can imagine, that does take a pretty big toll. That stress takes a big toll on your health, your physical health, as well as your mental health. And a scary statistic is that an unhappy marriage can shorten a person's life of an average of 4 years. That stress is really, really does add up. So make sure that if you're going to be married or in a relationship, that it's a happy one. When it comes to premarital education, so this is like a group education that is going to focus on relationship advice, right? And so some of this is actually required. Depending on, like, for example, if you are a religious and you want to get married in a church or you're a part of a church, sometimes there is a counseling that has to occur before they allow you to marry in their church. Of course, you can get married without premarital education, but if you want to marry in that venue or that church or marry and have that approved, then you have to go through counseling or some sort of premarital education. And usually, if it's a religion, it's like religiously like focused, right? Now, premarital education, not necessarily religious, just in general, like being a good spouse, right? They can significantly improve the quality of marriage, and it can reduce the chances that the marriage will end in divorce potentially, right? So the more educated you are, that's great, but also you have to engage in those practices. So think of it like marriage counseling before you actually get, it's like pre-marriage counseling, right? And it's recommended that premarital education begins before you get married. So 6 months to 1 year before you actually get married. So it's not like, oh, hey, we want to get married. Hey, let's go take this class real quick and then jump into this marriage. It is important that it's actually a process and that you take it seriously and that you try to do it well before you intend to get married. Now let's talk about divorce. So divorce has become an epidemic in the United States. The U.S. divorce rate has increased from 1990 through, 1990 through 2008. It has increased due to the doubling of the divorce rate in individuals 35 and older. And the United States has one of the highest divorce rates in the world. When it comes to, I'm just going to actually go ahead and move through these points here just so that you can see them. And so there are a lot of factors that go into potentially what can cause a divorce. Now, remember, not any one of these factors necessarily causes divorce, but a lot of times there's factors that are kind of, they build up, right? And so some people in certain groups do have a higher incidence of divorce. Those who get married younger, those with lower education level, lower socioeconomic status, if there is no religious affiliation, if you have parents who are divorced, having a baby before marriage, these are all things that are associated with divorce. Now, does that mean if you have a baby before you're married that you're destined to get a divorce? Absolutely not. These are things that are associated with an increase in divorce. So doesn't mean that you're destined for a particular destiny, right? What we find is that if a divorce is going to occur, it usually does take place more earlier in the marriage, and we're talking about between maybe the 5th to 10th year. That's where we're starting. That's where you typically see it. So if a divorce is going to occur, it usually takes place earlier in a marriage, and most divorces are occurring, between the 5th to 10th year of marriage. And even those adults who initiated their divorce, they are going to experience challenges even after a marriage dissolves, right? So these are definitely something that is not, once you divorce, you're done and over and you don't have to worry about that person or relationship anymore. So, there's still challenges. One of the biggest issues that people tend to have is, psychologically speaking, is that a divorced adult tends to have a really hard time trusting someone else in a romantic relationship. But of course, we see that people's lives can take really diverse turns following a divorce, and also depends on the reason for the divorce, right? So if the person divorced a partner because they were cheating, that person is going to have a whole lot more to deal with in terms of trust issues than somebody who just, had a amenable divorce and said, we're doing this amicably, right? So this is something that we're just not getting along, we're not right for each other, whatever it might be. And of course, as you have a more complicated marriage, right? So like if you have kids, if you have a house, if you, whatever, the more you have, of course, the more complicated a divorce can be. So let's take a look at these rates. So here, this is the percentage of divorces, right? And so we were just talking about this, that most of the divorces occur in this time frame right here. So early on, you see this kind of spike right here, that the percentage of about 10% of the divorces you see here, they occur as high as 10% will occur within the years 5 to 10 of marriage. And then as you continue on, so after you get through 10, so 10, 11 is like kind of like a milestone. It's like once you've hit that, your rate of divorce, the likelihood of divorce, it really declines very, very sharply after 10 years. So if you can last 10 years, that's great. And if you continue lasting 10 years, right, now you're seeing, at the 20-year mark, 25-year especially, that's the lowest percentage of divorce here is divorcing after 25 years together. It really starts to plateau after that. So really, if you can make it 25 years together, you're probably going to stick together. That's kind of the take home there. So when we look at same-sex couples, now this is where it starts getting tricky because a lot of the research out there is on heterosexual couples. So there's a lot of misconceptions about gay and lesbian couples, and they are not supported by research. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there that we need to be mindful of and not sort of perpetuating myths. So a few of the main issues that we're seeing. So there's now that same-sex marriage is legal in the United States. Before it was legal in all the states, this is especially true. This is still difficult in some areas. This sort of the legal and the social context of marriage. Especially before it was legal, you as a same-sex couple, if you wanted to get married and you lived in a state where it wasn't legal, then it wasn't like recognized, right, in that state. And if you had if your partner died, then you would not have the same legal rights as if you were heterosexual married in that state. And so that was causing a lot of issues with just legality, right? So you might have been living together for 50 years and married as soon as you could, and then your partner passes away, and now it's like you're not even you're just like a friend, right? Legally you don't have any ties to that person. So having same-sex marriage legal really, really, really helped individuals be able to have the same legal rights as any married couple, regardless of their orientation or their gender. And so of course the legal. So that was like, once it became legal, that's great because now they have these same legal rights. But before it was legal to marry in all the states, they did not have these barriers to breaking up like heterosexual partners have. And so if if you had a same-sex partner and you wanted to break up with them, then you didn't really have a lot of barriers. You didn't have to go through divorce. You didn't have to go through that, right? Now that it's legal, now they're having those barriers the same as heterosexual couples. So there's a really interesting shift there in that. Now, we know that there's a lot of ways that relationships for same-sex couples are similar to heterosexual couples. For example, in satisfactions, loves, joys, conflicts, it's all the same. It's all the same. It's just, it doesn't matter what your orientation is. Love is love, and the relationship is a relationship, and, you experience joys, you experience sadness. It's all the same sort of thing. What we do find in terms of differences, especially when it comes to lesbian couples, they tend to place a much higher priority on equality in their relationship. And so this can come into play into many different ways. So for example, when we look at gender roles, right? So especially if they have children, who does the more male-oriented sort of activities, who does the more female-oriented activities? It's much more equal. It's, everybody's pitching in and helping. Everybody's doing housework. Everybody's working outside. Everybody's working outside the home. There's a lot of equality, much more equality in same-sex relationships that we find compared to heterosexual relationships. So we see a lot of traditional gender roles when it comes to a heterosexual male-female couple. And looking at a recent relationship, a recent study of couples, finding that those who lived together for 10 years, those partners in gay and lesbian relationships showed a much higher average level of relationship quality compared to heterosexual couples. So those who lived together for 10 years, found a much higher level of relationship quality compared to similar heterosexual couples. And so it's important to note that there are some of these, that there's these differences that are recognized. For example, the, more equality in gender roles and things like that. But what's important to note is that, the similarities are much more prevalent than the differences, right? So that's really what a lot of the research is out there. Now, one thing that we don't have a lot of research on are things like couples who one is transgender, or there are much more non-traditional mixed families. These are things that we have to do more research on, because these are things that are becoming much more prevalent in the past 5 years or so, 5-10 years, and then now we're starting to see in the next few years. So we really need to get a lot more research on that to understand how is that impacting, for example, the family dynamic. How is that impacting adolescents? How are adolescents going into finding their identity, whether it's gender identity? What is that doing to their relationships? What is that doing to their future families? These are definitely things that research is currently being done on, and we're finding much more out about that. And really, I'm personally looking forward to seeing a lot of the research moving in that direction, so we can learn about these unique cases and different sort of family dynamics. So if you have any questions,